At 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, August 1st, 1981, the world changed forever with the debut of a brand new television network. After a voiceover announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll," footage from both the Columbia and Apollo 11 space missions was followed by an original theme song playing over an animated station logo. And then, the music video for the Buggles' "Video Killed the Radio Star" was shown, followed by a video for Pat Benatar's "You Better Run." Music television, or MTV as it would come to be known, was officially born. And while it was only available in New Jersey homes that first night, it would very soon come to be a dominant pop culture force across America and then the world. It's hard today to encapsulate just how much of a seismic shift the network was upon its arrival. Certainly, there'd been music videos before, but an entire network dedicated to them, and also including a fun collection of video jockeys or VJs to introduce them, as well as other rebellious, youth-orientated, cutting-edge original programming in the realm of game shows, animation, sketch comedy, and more, was unlike anything TV audiences had seen at the time. Although MTV's focus on music videos, and in fact, music in general, has largely diminished over the last couple decades, the videos and the artists behind them certainly were the stars in those early years. Throughout the 80s, the production values and unique stylistic tricks and innovations of many of these videos began to have a clear impact on both other television networks and, more importantly, motion pictures. Hollywood was eager to capitalize on MTV's success and draw in the same audience by producing films heavily influenced, both visually and tonally, by the popular music videos of the time. Ultimately, the world of music videos would even become a breeding ground for a new wave of critically and commercially successful filmmakers, as directors like Spike Jonze, Michel Gondry, Antoine Fuqua, and David Fincher, among many others, all cut their teeth on music videos before making the leap to feature films. While MTV was just starting to make its impact on Hollywood in the early 80s, though, another filmmaker, one who definitely did not come from the flashy world of rock and roll videos, was witnessing another seismic shift in Hollywood. Walter Hill watched as the down and dirty, gritty, realistic westerns and smaller-scale tales of crime and revenge he favored, and had long dominated what would be considered the action genre throughout the 60s and 70s, were seemingly being phased out and replaced with a new style of action: big, bombastic blockbusters starring a new breed of genetic superheroes, such as Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Although Hill would ultimately work with both those men, he nevertheless later admitted he never felt entirely comfortable or enamored with their, quote, oversized kind of cartoon action movie, end quote. Hill preferred a vastly more realistic sort of action, as he said, much more in the tradition that the bullets are real and they'll knock you down. He had already helmed a few films like this himself in the 70s and early 80s, though his only real success as a director by the time MTV debuted, the 1979 gang warfare epic The Warriors, was marred by stories of real-life gang violence and even murders at several of its theatrical screenings. But in 1982, Hill scored his first massive success as a director, with the action comedy 48 Hours, largely thanks to casting up-and-coming SNL star Eddie Murphy, a comedian very popular with the same young, in-tune audience that MTV catered to. Now armed with something of a director's blank check for the first time in his career, Hill decided to make a new film, eschewing the giant cartoonish action that was becoming the dominant trend, and instead going back to the same sort of mythic, Western archetypes of honor and heroism he loved, as well as the teenage rebellion and gang rumble movies of the 50s he had similarly grown up on. But, not unaware of the shifting winds of the entertainment world, Hill did decide to merge his old-school story with a visual aesthetic that would speak to the emerging MTV generation, and to focus his story on a world of music that might appeal to them as well. MTV had debuted with the words, "Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll," introducing TV audiences to the first network dedicated to rock. Now, Walter Hill was ready to introduce movie audiences to the rock and roll fable. The year is 1984, and Universal Pictures is ready to launch a new trilogy of graphic novel, rock and roll, and classic heroism-inspired action films, with Streets of Fire. Welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris. And we really are the perfect duo to discuss this film, seeing that Trev's senile stature causes him to go nowhere fast, while I'm able to share why tonight is what it means to be young.
Okay, I had a feeling Sometimes What It Means to Be Young was going to come into play somewhere here. You're very predictable at this point. But
Thank you.
that's all right. Well,
I have a trend.
You have a trend, yes. So, as some fans of the film might have already figured out from Chris's intro, this is a continuation of our now ongoing, for a bit, Fall Back to the 80s event. And coming back to our bread and butter, Chris, the actual failures, because last episode we took a little success to series deviation and looked at the Rocky franchise, but now we're heading back to what got us here in the first place, what brought us to the dance, which is, hey, maybe that's apropos for the movie we're talking about today. And that is 1984's, as it's described on Wikipedia, American neo-noir rock musical, Streets of Fire. Chris, do you want to tell us a little bit about Streets of Fire?
For sure. It is directed by Walter Hill. He made 48 Hours, The Warriors, and his bread and butter, actually, is he's a producer of the Alien franchise. So that's mainly how he makes his cash at this point.
That's where a lot of his cash would come from, I would imagine, yes. Yeah.
It is written by Walter Hill and Larry Gross, who actually joined him in writing 48 Hours together. So a nice little meeting of minds, again, for this venture. Its budget is $14.5 million. Worldwide, it made just over $8 million, so quite the bomb. And we'll discuss, I guess, why that happened and if it was warranted. So,
and this is one of those '80s films that I think we looked at before. We have looked at Flash Gordon and Buckaroo Banzai, and those were movies that, to my perception, were kind of almost instantaneous cult classics after they were released. Like they came out. They didn't do very well, but they found their audience pretty quickly on cable TV, and like throughout even in like the mid to late 80s, they were already gaining some steam and kind of getting some clout back as a cult, sensation. Yep. Streets of Fire, I would say, is very similarly a very big cult movie today, but I think this is one that it took some time to get there. I think I've seen like the cult for this movie really grow in the past decade or so. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit later too, as I believe this is another film, as I believe is the case with all these 80s movies we're looking at, that I'm familiar with, but you have never seen, correct?
Yes, you like to point out that I have not seen any movies before 1993. Film started with Jurassic Park in my mind. So yes, this has been a nice venture back in time, and well, maybe not nice, because I don't know how I felt about the other two movies, but this one we will see. I guess let's start with a little bit of. Maybe let's start there. How do you? What's your familiarity with this movie? Because mine is literally nothing. I actually stayed away from the trailer. Or plot synopsis or anything. Usually I do research before I watch the movie. But for whatever reason, I was like, you know what? I'm going to switch it up for myself, and I'm going to go in this one completely blind and then do all of my homework after the fact. So you go. What's your relationship?
Yeah, it's, this is one where I'm going to try and talk about this while dancing around my feelings about the film, because we like to save that for a little bit later. But I would say this is one that this is one I know I did not see like in the 80s. I don't think I actually saw this until maybe late 90s or early 2000s. Oh. And that was probably, if my memory serves, probably just coming across it on like cable one day and kind of watching it. And actually maybe I'll just save this until a little later to talk about like my reaction to it at the time, because maybe that feeds into how I'll feel about the movie as we discuss it later. Sure. But maybe that's enough to say is like, unlike the others we've looked at so far, this was not one that I necessarily grew up with. This was definitely, even for me, this was a little bit of a later discovery to kind of, just kind of happen upon it. Because like I said, I don't think this had quite the same reputation in the ether during the 80s that those other ones did.
No, not at all. Because even like me not being familiar with all of these fall back to the 80s films, I at least knew what Flash Gordon was. I knew that
this was like a title that when I recommended it, you were just kind of like, huh?
Yeah, right? I was like Streets of Rage, the video game. But yeah, no, I had no idea. But yeah, this kind of developed in actually we mentioned that the Walter Hill and Larry Gross were making 48 Hours together. Now I have Also, another movie I haven't seen, by the way.
Okay.
But
that's one you like are aware of.
yes, absolutely. I mean, Eddie Murphy. I mean, you know, basically every single movie he's in. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
he
Well,
was
and that makes sense
continues to
because
be, you know.
it's important to note too that 48 Hours was a gigantic hit. Like you
Yes.
say that, and I don't disagree. You say that probably a lot of Walter Hill's money comes from producing the Aliens films with his partner David Giler, and I would say yes, that's true. But I would also say probably the other part of his whatever massive fortune he has is from the fact that the first 40 Hours was a gigantic success that year.
You know what I always think about when 48 Hours comes up is just working in retail for my younger time in the job world, and mostly at Best Buys and Walmarts. And the amount of times I've restocked a 48 Hours DVD is unbelievable. So I was very familiar with the box art. So yes, 48 Hours sticks in my head.
Can I just ask you really quickly before we so I mean, as we're acknowledging what Streets of Fire is kind of the byproduct of Gross and Walter Hill getting, kind of a little bit of a blank check after 48 Hours, right? Saying suddenly people wanted to be in business with them because it wasn't 48 Hours was not Walter Hill's first directorial effort, but it was his first gigantic hit as a director. But I wanted to ask you, because there's some other movies I think are interesting before that. Obviously, you said he was already a successful producer as well. But can I just ask, what's your overall relationship or knowledge of Walter Hill? Are you a fan, or is he, have you seen The Warriors? I think that's a really important one to talk about in this. Besides, to you, is he only the producer of Alien, or do you have any other kind of sense of Walter Hill?
He is the producer of Alien to me.
Okay.
The Warriors, again, goes back to my retail days. The amount of times I restocked the Warriors video game for Xbox was a lot. So, Xbox or PS2, I can't remember what it was. But the Warriors, the only knowledge I have is really of like some just cultural, imagery.
So that's another movie you haven't seen.
Yes, exactly.
Oh
yes.
my God, what are we doing here?
I know. But you wrote me into a podcast about fucking failures. Okay. So this is where we're at. I blame you.
Because I wanted to bring that up because I would definitely consider myself a really big Walter Hill fan. I think Walter Hill, first of all, has a very, very distinct style, if not necessarily in terms of like filmmaking stylistics, then just like the tone and the kind of stories he likes to put on screen, and especially what he directs. And I think if you just kind of glance through his filmography, that starts to really come into focus. There's some deviations in there. Like you look at it, you wonder, why did he direct Brewster's Millions, the Richard Pryor comedy? But I mean, if you look at his other directorial efforts, I mean, so, his directorial debut was a film called Hard Times, which was a Charles Bronson movie about bare knuckle boxing. He followed that up with 1978's The Driver, about a getaway driver, starring Ryan O'Neal and Bruce Dern. That movie rules. I would recommend, if anyone who loves Drive with Ryan Gosling, I would say go back and watch The Driver. I think there's a lot of influence there. And then The Warriors, and as we were just saying, I think The Warriors is another movie that I believe it was fairly successful at the time, but it's definitely its reputation has grown so much over the decades. Yes. It's just like a huge cult sensation today. Then he produces Alien, as you said. Then he directs The Long Riders, which is a Western. Then Southern Comfort, which is a kind of Deliverance-esque tale about some guys in the woods who are some soldiers who end up getting kind of having to do battle with some hillbillies, rednecks in the woods who don't take kindly to their presence there. And then he follows that with 48 Hours, which is his first directorial mega hit. But even without going into some of the later films, the easy kind of dismissive way I think to explain a Walter Hill movie is he makes manly men movies, right? That's the easy way to look at it. But I think that's kind of shortchanging it a bit. I think I don't have a problem with calling his movies manly movies. I think that's true. But I also think he's very much interested in the kind of archetypes that make those kind of mythic stories. And that's what I think he's trying to accomplish a lot. And I think in particular, The Warriors and Streets of Fire are almost of a piece. And I know he's acknowledged that as well in terms of, he almost saw Streets of Fire as a continuation of what he started with The Warriors. But yeah, I think Walter Hill rules. And I think he's kind of today, maybe not as revered or talked about as I wish he was, but he definitely has this really, really unique, interesting place in cinema history, especially through the 80s.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue to even just jump into how he wanted to craft this film, because by describing it as a manly man type movie, or a movie made for him, basically he wanted to make a movie that he wanted to see, but as a teenager. Yeah. So that was the kind of the the thought process behind the writing of the movie. And he's here saying that it was supposed to have, everything that he had great affection for. Custom cars, kissing in the rain, neon, trains in the night, high-speed pursuits, rumbles, rock stars, motorcycles, jokes, leather jackets, just manly man, like you said.
And I think the important part is the last bit you left out there, and questions of honor.
Yes.
Which is like, that's probably the through line of Walter Hill's filmography, because I said, like, when he's talking about making these movies of like tough men and the predicaments they get in, what he's often doing is looking at the code of men, right? Mm-hmm. The honor code of masculine heroes. So that's definitely a very important part. But yeah, that's just what I like. What an idea, right? You get a blank check because your last film was a huge hit, and you say, okay, well, I'm just going to take everything I love and everything I loved as a teenager and throw it into a blender and see what happens. Because I'm sure he felt like this might only get this shot once, right? Yeah. I think it's also interesting that him and Gross have also acknowledged that they were thinking about comic book movies in somewhat, which were kind of nascent at the time, right? Like you had the Superman films, but this is pre-Batman, so it wasn't quite the same culture. But they were already thinking about like what could a comic book movie be. Walter Hill, you might know a little bit about this, Chris. I'm not sure if you do. He had always looked at The Warriors as kind of a comic book movie as well. Okay. Yeah. And in fact, that led to, unfortunately, years later, he did a director's cut of The Warriors. This is really frustrating because in most like physical media releases of it now, the director's cut is the only one available. Walter Hill's kind of like pushed for that. But it's where he went back into the movie and added these really lame animated comic book panel transitions.
Oh yeah,
and I just hate it. Like it's I've never met anyone who actually prefers the director's cut, except for Walter Hill. Well, I've never met him, but I think he's the only person who likes it. But yeah, so he definitely saw The Warriors as like a comic book film. And this again, he's talked about how Streets of Fire is kind of a comic book movie that's not based on a comic book, and he's talking about, I think, just the way the story is told, but even more so the visuals of it, right? The visual style.
It reminds me of a movie we covered here, Ultraviolet,
yes.
That started with comic book panels and was crafted as a comic book movie without the comic origins. And, well, go listen back to that, listeners, because that movie is a wild ride. That movie's a wild ride. I also think it's funny them doing business with Paramount on 48 Hours, and when they realized that they were going to get this blank check, I love that there's this quote here that Larry looked over at Walter and said, "Paramount is pregnant. Let's get something and set it up right away." Yeah. So they were just like, should we wait, or should we just write a spec script right now? And Walter proudly considers himself a capitalist, says, "Oh yeah, no, let's write the script right now." So, good for them, and off to the races with this one.
Yeah. Although, interestingly enough, this does not end up at Paramount, but instead at Universal. So.
Yes. For some infighting, which I thought that was funny. Basically, when they finish the script, they bring it to Paramount, and Michael Eisner does not get along with Larry or Lawrence Gordon, I think, or something, and they just have like a fight about it, and they reject it because it's too similar to Indiana Jones. I found that was strange.
Yeah,
that was a strange comparison.
That was Eisner's like mentality, right? He said it was too similar to Indiana Jones, and it makes me wonder, what did he read it? Like, what is going on here?
I do like Michael Eisner being like, that's too similar to something else, and then he goes off and makes, does he go off and make Ants when A Bug's Life is out?
I also like that you think about, he was like, it's too similar to Indiana Jones, that gigantic franchise that everyone loves and makes tons of money. Heaven forbid we try to make one of those, Like,
Totally.
How has this guy ever been as successful as he is in this business? Like, you're supposed to copy the big thing, aren't you?
Yeah. 100%.
So even if you felt that way, you'd think that would be, you would want to sign off on it. But whatever.
Yeah, whatever. It ends up at Universal, and they actually get the go-ahead within around 48 hours to greenlight the movie.
Yeah.
But we should back up just a little bit
and
just say
let's talk a little bit more about the writing of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and how this kind of came to fruition. Again, comic book movie was a big influence, comics were a big influence, but also we were about to name him, I think, or did we name him? Or maybe it was just in my head, I was about to say it, but George Lucas was a big influence in this, because what they wanted to do is they wanted to create a fantasy movie. Like, as Trev said, this was a rock and roll fable.
Yes.
They wanted to make something mythic, something out of this world, something that you can't place in time or space. It's just kind of a story that would be timeless. And Yeah, I really I liked that idea of that.
Yeah. This is something, again, that Walter Hill had already been playing with to a smaller degree with the film like The Warriors, which it takes place in New York City, and it's a New York City that's not quite the New York City of the time because it is so infested with gangs, right? When you watch that movie, you're just like, well, geez, like it seems like 70% of New York's population must be these gang members.
Yeah.
And like it's like a little heightened reality. And I think he just takes that to the next natural step or progression here by saying, let's just create a movie. I mean, even like the first text you see on the screen, this is another place, another time. And the idea of when you say this is a fantasy, it's not a Lord of the Rings type fantasy, but instead it's a fantasy in that it's kind of merging different time periods. You can't watch this movie and really put it in a particular historical place or figure out exactly where it's supposed to be, and yet it's hitting on a lot of archetypes and time periods that we recognize.
I watched an interview with Walter Hill, and he said that they coined this term when they were making 48 Hours, and then placed it over this film, and was kind of the leading term for the production design and the costuming and the lighting, just everything all encompassing. And they called it exaggerated realism.
And that's awesome. I love that idea. And it's interesting too, like to go back and, we talked about how we were already talking about some of the other influences, but they were really like kind of shooting for the stars with this one of saying, let's make this the ultimate movie that might please everyone, which normally is a mentality you and I get really suspicious about. But I think they're kind of looking at it the right way, right? Instead of just saying, let's think of like all the things people really enjoy and kind of try to merge them into something new. And so another recent success that they were heavily influenced by was actually Flashdance.
Yeah.
Flashdance had just been a recent box office hit, and that's what kind of started bringing in the idea of maybe bringing musicals into this. Now, Chris, musicals. Let's briefly talk here about musicals. We have to because although you can't consider this a traditional musical, Walter Hill's been very upfront about how heavily influenced this is by musicals, and I think you can sense that watching the film. This is a type of musical for sure. And he's talked about that, or Larry Gross has talked about this as well, right? He says, we said this movie is a stylized movie. It's not so different from the world of a musical. And I think I've seen Walter Hill talk about this as well, about the idea of one thing you can give musicals is that they all, and this is what I like about them, and this is why I'm kind of surprised you are not as into them, but most musicals, to a T, kind of exist in this heightened reality, right? This other world that doesn't quite exist.
Right.
I've always said musicals are very similar to kung fu movies in that the kind of gigantic kung fu fights that break out are these like heightened emotion moments that aren't too dissimilar from the choreographed dance numbers. And it's like these things don't really happen in our reality, but that's okay because this is what film allows you to do, is create this other sense of reality, these other worlds that are recognizable as our world, but not quite. And so I think that's what they were like looking at here, is saying, okay, well, let's make a rock and roll Fable then, but also still incorporate, action movie tropes and, the code of men and things like that.
Yeah, I went into this film with some baggage. That's what Trev's getting at here. Is that, I don't want to say anti-musical, but it's just a genre that I do not choose on my own accord. I need to be talked into them. And I think there's different, as we're getting at, there's different levels of musicals, right? And I think the musical that I just cannot stand is the everybody stop, look at the camera, getting it into a big flash mob and do that. I just don't like that. It just rips me out, which is weird because I do like, I like the theater, I like plays, but I think it's because I'm watching people singing then and now and doing what they need to do in front of me, and I think that's a talent, right? Like that's what I'm appreciating there. But something about filmed musicals, it just turns me off. It's one of those trigger points that I'm just like, I'm just not really into this. While there are some musicals though where I'm a fan of, and I think they're the more Sweeney Todds of the world. They're the more like extremely stylized in their, mise en scene, I guess, which is what I would say. But they are singing their lines versus stopping to sing a song to me. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, like more in the opera sense of like the narrative continuing through. Yes.
And then also though, Trev recently and a few friends of mine, actually, I have to give credit to, were on me to watch the Elvis movie that came out this year in 2022. I didn't want to watch it. I was very much against it. I was like, I have no interest whatsoever to sit through 3 hours of that. But I trust my friends, one included here, and I watched it and I loved it. Yeah. And I think that one, again, it goes into that hyper realism, right? It becomes a fantasy film.
Yeah, and that's by the same token, I'm going to keep on you until I'm successful to try and get you to watch Spielberg's West Side Story.
Yes,
which is just an incredible feat of filmmaking. And I think that's what I'm alluding to is like with Elvis, with West Side Story, with some of the musicals that I know you've enjoyed. Like I know from perusing your letterbox to try and get you a little bit, I do know that you were a fan of like La La Land and Singing in the Rain. So I think there are instances where the musical style allows you to do very, very interesting, incredible, and fantastical things with your camera movements.
Correct.
And with the way the scenes are set up, and with the way the world looks, and like that's where when it's at its best, I think it's working really well.
You're chipping away at me. Again, I've given you some of my time.
Yeah.
and one day I will watch West Side Story. I just. That's even got the remake thing on it too, so it's like, oh, for fuck's sakes!
I gotta find like some kind of I gotta make up an article that says there was supposed to be a West Side Story 2, and it didn't happen.
You reveal it to me 2.5 hours into our recording.
Continuing this discussion though about their influences, Gross has also said that they were even influenced by the teen films of John Hughes while they were writing this. So they were really just like looking at everything and throwing it into the blender, and they also had in mind the fact that Francis Ford Coppola had been making kind of 50s inspired rough and tumble teen delinquency movies like The Outsiders and Rumblefish. So they were really, this was like kind of a, like I said, a hodgepodge of material kind of put together to say, what can we make that will fit all, speak to all this audience? And of course, we also have to mention that the other big thing that was happening at this time was the rise of MTV. And like music videos, and how music video is becoming a new kind of form of media that people are really like loving and seeing for the first time. So this movie is obviously also very music video influenced in its style and look and approach.
So we already covered that they went to get this movie set up at Universal, which they did, and they have the green light. And now they're thinking, okay, well now we need a cast, right? Yep. And going back to that, having a comic book hero that nobody knows about, they kind of did want more unknowns for this film, right? Yeah. So that was kind of cool. I have a quote here from Larry Gross. There was always the idea that we were going to discover a new Steve McQueen, a young white guy who would ride a motorcycle and have a carbine over his shoulder and be a mainstream icon. Now, that's awesome. Like that's just a cool image. And of course, then they look at Eric Roberts, Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, and they actually do offer it to Tom Cruise, which is just busy at the moment. Now, Trev, it's been a while since we talked about Tom Cruise. Yeah. And Tom Cruise is going through a bit of a fucking success right now. Okay.
Yeah. And putting it lightly, yes.
Yeah, to put it lightly. But Tom Cruise is, as me and Trev have said on many, many podcasts and in life, and when we go to bed at night, we say to each other, Tom Cruise is the last movie star. And I think Top Gun Maverick is proving that to a T. He gives it all. He gives everything to the audience, everything on camera. He's just a wild, wild man. And I will never not love watching him. That would have been amazing if he was in this movie. I just want to say that first off. He's always been good, right?
This movie, you would have definitely already been aware of this movie. That's for sure. If he was in it, right? Like that's for sure. I'll talk later about what I think about that potential casting. And even between those, like I can definitely picture a version of this movie that has Patrick Swayze in the lead as well.
Yeah,
definitely. I think it's like that era. Like that's what you're thinking of too. Is like those guys, not just those guys as we know them consistently, but them in 1982, 1983, right?
Totally.
And I can totally see Patrick Swayze as Tom Cody as well. Eric Roberts is a little bit tougher for me to see, but I get it. I also get why he would still be in the mix, especially back at that time. But like I said, they make Tom Cruise the offer, but he had already accepted, I believe it was Legend, right? Ridley Scott's Legend that kept him away from this. Yeah. So without Tom Cruise, and apparently I don't know if they ever went to Eric Roberts or Patrick Swayze, but I guess they decided to go even more unknown, and they turned their attention to a young actor who actually at this time when they find him is working as a chef in a restaurant in New York.
Yeah.
So this is really one of those like plucked from. I guess I can't say plucked from obscurity because there's one movie done which had been, I believe, a fairly modest success, and that was Eddie and the Cruisers.
Yep.
And Chris, I don't know how well you're aware of that movie or even know what that movie is. That's a movie that surprisingly enough does have a sequel later, and you would never guess watching that movie that it would ever get a part two. But the lead actor of that and the man who ends up being our Tom Cody for Streets of Fire is Michael Pere. Only 23 at the time, and definitely besides that lead role in Eddie and the Cruisers, still, as he will tell you in interviews about this film, very, very green.
Yes.
And like I said, and like he was like even though he'd done that one movie, he was still working at a restaurant at this point. Mm-hmm. So this was really like not what you would expect to pick to put in a studio lead role, but that's exactly I guess what they were looking for.
Well, yeah, and what they thought of him was that he struck the right combination of toughness and innocence. Mm-hmm. And when you watch the movie, I mean, I would say that that makes sense. Makes sense. So I understand why they would go with him. And we'll talk more about his performance when we get into the review, obviously. Mm-hmm. But now you need a female lead, or at least, I guess, the damsel in distress, we might want to say instead.
Well,
right?
And that's the thing, too, is this is like this. This to them was a very important casting because Gross has also said, while during the writing of this film, that Walter Hill was very, very aware of the reputation he was starting to get about the female characters in his movies.
Yes.
Because I mentioned how he makes like very manly movies, these stories about men, and sometimes the byproduct of those movies is the women aren't necessarily the focus, and they're maybe not always depicted in the most flattering fashion. And Gross has said that people think that Walter doesn't like women, and he knows that's not true. So he was really looking to see, he said he wanted to put a female character right in the center of this narrative. Now, it's interesting that he does so by making it, as you said, kind of a damsel in distress.
Right.
But still, I think he wanted it to at least be a little bit more complex, likable, and memorable of a character. And so that is the character of Ellen Aim. And they really wanted Daryl Hannah at the time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But she was unable to do it for, I don't know exact reasons. Maybe she had another role she had already, signed on to. But they instead turned their attention to a very young, but already somewhat experienced actress named Diane Lane.
Very experienced. She had done 10 films by this time. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
That's I had no. First of all, Diane Lane. I have to let's put a pin in this for a second. Diane Lane is magnificent.
We've talked about Diane Lane in the past when we did Judge Dredd.
Yes, she is. She is a perfect being in looks and ability. She's an incredible actress. Always loved her. If you don't love Diane Lane, I think you're an idiot.
And she wanted this role bad too. That's
yes,
the thing too. Like,
so much so that when she met with Hill to audition for this, she wore black leather pants, a black mesh top, and high-heeled boots. And Walter Hill was surprised with her total commitment to selling herself as a rock and roll star. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, she's quoted also saying something like this is like the first glamorous role she's ever had, which I mean makes sense. She was 18 years old. Like, it's kind of funny that she said that. But 10 films in the tank already is very, very impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah, it's a good thing Michael Pere was only 23, and because she was 18, and I've seen some interviews with him where he's talked about how he definitely developed a crush on her while they were making the movie, and it's kind of funny.
No shit, Mike.
Yeah, it's kind of funny listening to him talk about it because he like flat out says like, I thought about how like maybe I should try to like seduce her, and and make her mine, but I knew that would probably be unprofessional, and I just like that he's like the level of confidence he has that he's like, if I had decided to do it, it would have happened for sure. But I was like nice, and I decided not to go that route.
Yeah. Okay, there, Michael.
Yeah. But Hill ends up so impressed with her during the production of the movie that he actually ends up writing additional scenes for her, like during the shoot, and really beefs up her role and does give her more to do. And I will say, yes, technically she is a damsel in distress, but only to a point in the film. And then she is kind of something else, right?
Agreed.
And we can talk about some of the other elements of it later on, but I think it is it's a better role than we've seen for women in some of his previous films, that's for sure. And then speaking of that, before we get to the villain, let's talk about the other primary female role in this, because this is a very interesting one as well, right? Because the other starring role in this was never meant to be a woman.
No.
So Amy Madigan, the actress, came in originally to read for the role of Riva, which is Tom Cody's the hero's sister in the film, which is kind of a smaller character. Ends up being played by Deborah Van Valkenburg, who fans of The Warriors will remember as the female lead in that movie. So he brought her back for this. But Amy Madigan read for it, and during the audition, she just flat out told Hill and Joel Silver, the other producer, that she's like, I'm not into this role. It's just like the sister. The best role on the page here is Tom Cody's sidekick. So in the script, he has a sidekick who is kind of this like tough soldier named was it Mendez, I believe, at the time, because they were looking at Edward James Olmos, right? And she says, I would want to play that role. Like, why I know it's a soldier, but like, why can't it just be a woman? You wouldn't have to do that much rewriting, just make it a woman. And Hill thought about that, really liked the idea, ended up giving it to her. And I thought this was interesting because people don't often make this comparison. But you have to consider that maybe the reason he was so willing to make that change was because he'd already gone through this with Ripley in Alien.
Totally.
The same general idea, right? He'd seen the success of that and how, yes, if you have a role that's written kind of gender neutral and the general assumption in Hollywood is always going to be, let's make it a man. Well, just why not make it a woman and make, and that's that, and don't don't suddenly write it to be overly feminine or anything. And the character suddenly becomes that much more interesting. And Amy Madigan gets a much more compelling part to play.
Yep. And then they changed the name to McCoy.
Yes.
Rather than, what did you say? Gomez? What did you say?
Yes, Gomez Adams. No, it was Mendez.
Mendez. Yeah. So she's locked in. And then finally, we need a villain. We need a villain to go up against our comic book hero. So who do they look at? Well, actually, Walter Hill talks to a little lesser known director, Catherine Bigelow, which she has become. Well, I guess she hasn't done much lately, but I mean, she's pretty successful, obviously.
Yeah.
I guess they would have met through James Cameron, obviously, right? Because they were married at the time.
I'm trying to think. My timeline of the Bigelow Cameron marriage isn't the best.
Yes.
I don't have that information just at the top of
and
my.
He's had a few marriages. He's had a few marriages, but
no, actually, I see now. Bigelow at the time was actually dating David Giler, who was the other Alien producer. That's Walter Hill's producing partner. So that's why they would have met. Yes.
Okay. Well, she recommends Willem Dafoe. Again, this is another actor. Put a pin in it to say, if you don't like Willem Dafoe, you're an idiot.
Seriously, Willem Dafoe to me is he's like Keanu Reeves, like Brendan Fraser level, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a bad thing to say about Willem Dafoe, you have no business watching movies.
Willem Dafoe is like the A+ actor, the A+ list actor that loves doing character parts. And it's always a joy to see Willem Dafoe. And let me remind you, Trev, that I didn't know fucking nothing about this movie. Okay, so when these actors are popping up in front of me, I was like, holy shit! Like I was very excited off the top. Let's just say that. So yeah, Willem Dafoe is the villain, Raven Shattuck, the leader of a motorcycle gang, the Bombers. So
yes. The man who kidnaps Ellen Aim and sets this narrative into motion. Yeah. He had just worked with Catherine Bigelow on her debut feature called The Loveless, in which she played a biker. So Walter Hill has kind of mockingly said, he's like, that just shows you how creative I was. I just decided I'll just use him as a biker again because I know he can do it. So this is very early work for Willem Dafoe, but it's not too dissimilar from the kind of roles we still get from Willem Dafoe today.
And now the last cast member we have to mention. Is Canadian treasure Rick Moranis.
Yes.
Again, if you don't like Rick Moranis,
yeah,
you're an idiot.
What a pleasant set this must have been. Well, although we do know some other stories about that.
Yes, which we will definitely have to talk about. Yes. But yes, Rick Moranis is in this, playing against type. He plays Ellen's current boyfriend. Bill
/ manager.
Yeah, what's his name?
Billy Fish.
Billy Fish, and he's kind of an asshole in the movie. And it's just I love Rick Moranis. If you don't love him, he's just a great he's again Canadian treasure. Yeah.
And there's some other very interesting faces and recognizable actors who pop up over the course of the film that we'll talk about more when we get into our review. But yeah, I was actually maybe of anything in this movie, I was maybe most excited for you to discover like the asshole character of Rick Moranis. Because as you said, it's definitely not what you expect from him.
No, well, especially this movie released the same year as Ghostbusters. So like that's what's nuts. You know, he plays a bumbling idiot in Ghostbusters, and then in here he's just a smarmy asshole.
Yeah. We should also just briefly mention, because it's a very important part of this movie, is the music, and even how much that feeds into the title of the film. So if anyone's wondering why this movie is called Streets of Fire, that is because that was actually the name of a song from Bruce Springsteen on his 1978 album Darkness on the Edge of Town. And the intention was to have that song be heavily featured in the movie, have it be one of the songs Ellen Aim performs with her band, The Attackers. And they came close. Like Springsteen at one point had signed off on it, was fine with that. But then he found out that the song would actually be re-recorded by other vocalists in the movie. So it would be the Ellen Aim, quote unquote version. And so he redrew with permission from the song to be used. And so they no longer had that song, but they decided that title was too good. It was too good not to run with. So they kept the name of the movie Streets of Fire, but now they still needed new songs, because music was going to play a heavy part in this. And there's a lot of bands kind of involved with this, but the two main ballads that start and end this film, the two Ellen Aim and the Attackers songs, they turned to Jim Steinman, the late great Jim Steinman. We just lost him last year, unfortunately. If you're into music, and especially like the kind of big bombastic power ballads of the 80s, Jim Steinman is very much someone you're familiar with. He was Meatloaf's primary collaborator. He kind of wrote and produced a lot of the music on the Bat Out of Hell albums. He also worked with Bonnie Tyler. He's the man who wrote and is behind Total Eclipse of the Heart. So yeah, he's an awesome guy for those kind of go-to big, huge power ballads of that time. And he helps them compose and create the two songs that bookend this. And then there's a lot of other music throughout. Maybe we'll mention some of it. But I think it's worth mentioning that not only did they work with Jimmy Iovine, who was like a really successful big music producer at the time, to kind of oversee the entire soundtrack, but it's quite the clout to have these two Jim Steinman songs. And I know whatever else people think about the movie, I feel like a lot of its emerging cult reputation today is due to people loving those songs.
I also want to mention briefly before we jump into a review that on that note, they got the lighting guy for Bruce Springsteen and Pink Floyd, Mark Brickman, to light all of the concert scenes as well. So again, going back to what we were talking about, the inception of this movie, making it a rock, fable, musical action movie, they definitely were putting all the pieces in place to set out what they wanted to do. So yeah. Should we see if they did what they set out to do?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll be coming for her, and I'll be coming for you too.
Sure you will, and I'll be waiting.
You are about to enter a world unlike any you've ever seen before, where rock and roll is king. The only law is a loaded gun, where the beautiful,
Stay and see the show. It's really good.
the brutal,
I want Tom Cody.
and the brave all meet
From now on, it's for real.
in Streets of Fire.
The bombers and this guy, Raven Shattuck, they stole Ellen Aim. She's not just your old
Oh,
girlfriend.
Reaver, what do you want from me, huh?
You know what I
You
want.
want me to go rescue an old girlfriend who's shacked up with another guy? Can you really get her back? You got a better volunteer.
If they got her anywhere, they got her at Torchy's. It's a real knockdown joint, no class.
Looks like I finally ran into someone that likes to play as rough as I do.
Yeah, this must be your lucky night.
Now, from the creators of 48 Hours, Universal Pictures presents Michael Paré, Diane Lane, Rick Moranis, and Amy Madigan in a Walter Hill film, Streets of Fire.
It's another time, another place. This rock and roll fable follows soldier for hire Tom Cody on a rescue mission to save his ex-girlfriend turned famous singer Ellen Aim from the clutches of Raven Shattuck, the leader of the ruthless motorcycle gang, the Bombers. Joined by female ex-soldier McCoy, as well as Ellen's current boyfriend/manager Billy Fish, this unlikely trio will stop at nothing to get Ellen back safe and sound.
Great summary. Not the hardest movie in the world to summarize.
No.
Ultimately.
No.
For one of the easier ones we've dealt with.
Yeah.
So Chris, I wanted to go first on this one because I wanted to find that you asked me earlier what my history of this movie is, and I can kind of wrap that into this. But let me just start by saying, and you'll get a sense of how I feel just by me kind of clarifying this. because I feel two things are about to happen, right? There's only two options in my head here of what's about to happen. Either when I'm done talking, you're going to say that this movie is awesome and I'm going to breathe a giant sigh of relief, or you're going to say it's bad or just okay, and I'm going to be sad and wonder why I ever bothered with this podcast. Because I love this movie with a fiery passion. I mentioned how over the last decade or so, I feel like this movie's cult status has really grown. And I was definitely someone who, as I said, I did see it earlier than that. But I remember at the time, I mean, I liked it when I first saw it, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it really connected with me. And it might honestly be because I don't know if I saw it all the first time I saw it. I think I maybe came into it like halfway through on TV or something. And then, as we said, this one took a little bit to kind of gain a reputation, and it wasn't the most, available movie in the world. And it has some really incredible original theatrical posters, but there was I remember there was this DVD release of it that had the most lame, boring Photoshop cover of all time, and I'd see that in the store and just be like, oh, all right, that's that one movie from the 80s no one cares about, So it kind of took me a bit to get back to this, and I really kind of fell back in once that cult started to grow and you saw more people talking about it. And I would say over the last few years, this is one of the movies I've gone back and rewatched the most. I have the Shout Factory special edition Blu-ray of this, and the reason, Chris, that I already knew a lot of the information we just talked about is that is a Blu-ray that has 2 feature-length documentaries about the making of the film on it.
Wow.
I don't know why it has 2. I assume both had already been made, and they're like, I don't know, let's put them both on there. But yes, this is a movie I've tried to introduce multiple people to, because it's one of those movies that I love kind of sitting there and watching people's first reactions to it. Obviously, as we talk more about it, I'll talk about the specific things I like, but it kind of hits on what Walter Hill was going for. I think he totally succeeded in that this is this really interesting, bizarre kind of fable that doesn't, it is out of time, it is out of place, but it is perfectly, kind of deconstructing and revisiting these big mythic archetypes in a way that it's with a really cool visual sense and with this really unique, visual flair, and just, I love how simplistic the dialogue is. Actually, I'll kind of wrap up. I want to read this quote from Walter Hill. I'll let him speak for me a little bit because I think he's dead on in what he accomplished here. He says, Streets of Fire is, by design, comic book in orientation, mock epic in structure, movie heroic in acting style, operatic in visual style, and cowboy cliche in dialogue. In short, it's a rock and roll adventure where the leader of the pack steals the queen of the hop and Soldier Boy comes home to do something about it. And that's him speaking to how he's taking these kind of cliche tropes of storytelling and then, purposely doing this kind of big operatic epic, sheen over all of it. And I just think it's incredible. And honestly, the movie that the modern movie I would most compare it to, and I can speak more of this later if you'd like, is I think this movie, I don't know for sure, but I feel like this movie might be a huge influence on Mad Max Fury Road. I think there's a lot of kind of similarities that are interesting if you get into it. So yeah, I love Streets of Fire, and now I wait with bated breath to see how the rest of this conversation is going to go.
Well, let's remind the listeners that in their fallback to the 80s, Flash Gordon, I think I was just very baffled by why it's kind of stood this cult test of time. I was just like, it's just not that good. It's got a couple good scenes in it, and that's probably what people remember the most. Buckaroo Banzai just tested my patience. and I know some of our listeners take offense to that because they love it, and that's great. That's great. You can be wrong too. It's fine. But yeah, that one was not for me. Thank God we took the break to watch the Rocky, or to talk about Rocky movies and our success to series. And Trev, I hate to disappoint you.
Oh no.
Because I would not say this movie's awesome. I would say that I adored this movie.
Oh, thank
God. and I've been holding it in for about 3 days now.
Yes.
How much I fucking love this movie.
Yeah. Because isn't it the kind of movie you do watch and just want to talk about?
Dude, I've been texting friends about it. Mm-hmm. I've been shopping for the Blu-ray. I've been trying to find it. It's too expensive. Sorry. I want to buy it, but I don't love it that much. It's like $50. It's like so much.
Because it's out of print now or whatever.
Yeah. And I've been trying to find one used. I've been searching up and down around the internet. Dude, I love this movie. It is so good. It is so awesome. Yes. The first fucking 5 minutes of this movie, I was just bouncing in my chair.
Yeah.
I was just like, man, this is the way to fucking start a movie. It just delivers on such a simple setup. And I love a simple movie. You know, I'm a simpleton myself. But like a simple premise is great when your execution and your style exceeds the premise, right? This is a fairy tale about a damsel in distress. Sure, that's simple. I've seen it a million times. But the execution of this movie is phenomenal. The editing. Dude, you know I love my editing. You know, that's like one of my favorite things. I edit this podcast. It's one of my favorite hobbies. I just love it. And I love film editing. It's always been a thing. I almost went to school for it. And the editing is so on point with this movie. And it's shocking because there was 4 credited editors on this.
It's shocking not only for that purpose, but it's also, I don't know if you've seen, but Walter Hill's kind of hard on himself about this one, where he says that he felt like he was a little out of his league with the musical element of it.
Yeah.
He's like not sure he nailed it. And then you watch the movie, you're like, dude, Walter, take it easy on yourself.
100%.
This is incredible. Yeah.
Take the W.
Yeah.
You made it work. But yeah, 4 credited editors is usually a Chris and Trev fucking nightmare. You know? But no, this movie works. It's absolutely cliche-driven dialogue I wrote down, which I loved.
Yes.
The archetypes are there. The production design is timeless. I love that I couldn't place it. Like, when I texted my buddies, I was like, it's a movie that's, you know, it's made in the 80s, but you feel like you're in the 50s, but also still in the 80s. Like, it's totally out of time. It feels like a comic book. They totally match that. The sets have a certain color to them, a certain color palette. The costuming is like that.
Well, yeah, like I love like the best thing, like, and just to briefly hop around, the best like extrapolation of that is, as you just said, all the vehicles and costumes are of the 50s.
Yeah.
In general, the look of the buildings is of the 50s. But then you have the 80s neon throughout all of it as well, right? And a lot of the music is very kind of clearly 80s rock. And then there's that one moment where they go to a different part of town where they meet up with E.G. Daily, which we'll talk about later. And suddenly, in that like one alley where everyone's kind of hanging outside, everyone's dressed like the 70s.
Yeah.
Right? It's got like that 70s, like they're dressed like 70s like pimps and kind of street culture. And it's like, oh man, what is going on here? You know, and that's and I love that, right? Anytime someone does that kind of out of world, out of place thing, I wish honestly more movies did it, because we don't have to be this locked into reality. And I think what Walter Hill is very smart at, because you mentioned the dialogue being kind of cliche and simple, and the story being simple. He is a master, and I really can't wait for you to see The Warriors now as well. It's not a movie we'd ever talk about here, but it's one you should catch up on. Of making these kind of big operatic stories that are undeniably silly, and yet still kind of grounded in this dramatic realism, and you know, and these action beats and these stories of like, you know, of honor and code, and just like finding the right way to mix those things together, not like dismissing the silliness, but using it to your advantage.
Yeah, again, it's just hyper stylized, right? And you know this as well as, you know, some of our listeners know. You know, I'm not trying to, you know, pat myself on the back or anything, but I have a nice 75-inch, you know, 4K TV with, you know, Philips Hue reactive lighting setup, right? And as you said, this movie has a lot of neon. And it also has a lot of explosions, Trev, my number one thing in the world. And watching this as loud as possible on my surround sound home theater with the TV in the dark with the reactive lighting, dude, I was losing it. I was like, this movie fucking kicks ass. And then Bill Paxton shows up. I was like, this is my favorite movie of all time. Dude, yeah, no, I know we're talking so generic right now, and we'll get into some specifics, but yeah, overall, just a blast. Also 90 minutes.
Yes.
Thank you. 90-minute movies need to, we got to come back. Let's come back to reality and make 90 minutes movies, please. Please.
Yeah, gets in, gets out, tells the story it needs to tell, with a couple like interesting like twists I think you don't see coming, but still, it doesn't fart around, it doesn't waste any time. You know, we're thrown in pretty quickly. I mean, as you said, in the opening 5 minutes, Ellen Aim is kidnapped.
Yeah.
And a letter is sent from Tom Cody's sister to him, just telling him, we see the letter and it just says, Tom, I need you, come home. He comes home, and she basically just tells him, you got to go get your ex-girlfriend. And then we're off and rolling, you know, and it doesn't waste any time. It's a movie that knows we don't need a 20-minute backstory of Tom Cody. No. We don't need long exposition about what his history is. We will learn those things. We will learn about their past relationship, and we'll figure out what kind of character he is just through his actions in the film. and what he does through the course of the narrative. So let's just get the ball rolling, and let's hit the ground ready to go.
Yep, absolutely. And I love syncing up this trio of characters, right? Yeah. And with this snappy, noirish, cliche-driven dialogue, it works because they're always constantly like digging at each other, which I loved.
Look, I'll take you through the battery and where the barbers hang out, but I'm not taking any risks. I'm not paying you to add any thrills to my life. That's not how it works.
You got a real big mouth, fish.
Look, Butch, I buy and sell people more valuable than you every day.
You know, it's hard to figure out what's more pathetic, the way you talk or the way you dress.
Let me tell you something. These clothes are worth more than you make in a year.
I can see working with you two is gonna be a real dream.
I'm a ball breaker myself. You know that. Actually, you're quite good at it too. But like we are natural ball breakers to our friends, right? And it just that defines a lot of my friendships. So to see it play out in this movie and them form genuine friendships by the end of it, like just works, right? It doesn't come off mean-spirited or anything. And because of the heightened acting, in particular, let's talk about Rick Moranis, right? He's playing against type right now, right? But he's very snappy, right? He's talking in that heightened 50s noir, just, affect.
You must be Billy Fish.
Yeah. So what gives? And make it fast. My time is valuable.
You want Ellen Aim back? I'm gonna get her.
You in what army?
I can see you two are gonna get along just fine.
I want 10 grand.
Easy. All you gotta do is earn it.
I'll earn it. And you're gonna help. Reva told me you used to live in the Battery.
I started out there. It's the shits. I wouldn't go back to that dump if you paid me.
You're going. I need somebody who knows their way around.
I don't think so. It's not my scene.
You want your meal ticket back, get in the car, otherwise the deal is off.
Look, Cody, you sound pretty dumb, but nobody's that dumb. I'm the one paying you. That means you go get her, I wait here, and you bring her back to me.
And it's
he's going for it a little bit more than some of the actors are, right?
Yes.
You get the sense he watched some old 50s movies and decided to like imitate that, which works well for his character.
It works well for his character, but not well with his relationship with Michael Paré.
No.
Because there's stories on the set, and again, reminder, Michael Paré is very new to this, right? New to Hollywood, and new to comedians. Yeah. And, we're big, stand-up comedy fans or this and that, but comedians love to dig at each other, right? And I think Paré wasn't used to Rick Moranis making fun of him on and off set, and kind of going for the jugular a little bit, maybe. And
he says the first thing Rick Moranis said to him when they met was, Rick Moranis said, "Do you just act cool, or are you really cool?" And Paré was like instantly kind of bothered by that. And I do like I just want to read this, Chris, because it's amazing.
Sure.
Even I love Rick Moranis, and I think it should be against the law to say anything bad about Rick Moranis. However, I'll give Michael Paré the leeway on here just because I love this quote where he says he's this weird-looking little guy who couldn't get laid in a whorehouse with a fistful of 50s.
He was happily married for a long time, okay? So you know what?
Maybe that's what Paré means,
Yeah.
But no, obviously, they did not get along. But you know what? That's good, like in a sense, right? Because it comes across on screen. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And then Amy Madigan as McCoy is got her, I love how she's female, but she doesn't bring attention to it ever. And there's I think one moment where I think Tom Cody's like slightly maybe gonna hit on her, but not really, like just kind of passing it along at her. And she goes, "Sorry, buddy, you're not my type." And then right away it's like, "Oh, okay, these guys are just gonna be buddies."
Yeah, and it even because anytime it's brought up after that, it's almost kind of like a joke between the two of them.
Yes,
right? Like they know that they're destined to be friends now and nothing more. And that's actually I know this is something you and I have talked about before too. Like that's something I just miss so much in general in action movies, right? Just like a man and a woman that are just colleagues.
Yes.
And you don't need to put anything else on it.
Yeah, like this movie doesn't end in a kiss or even a hug, with them. It's just, there's these, it's a little spoken. There's the scene in the bar.
Maybe I rode you a little harder than I should have.
You don't get sentimental on me. But know how to handle it.
Hey, I got a problem with Ellen I got to talk to you about.
Yeah, I understand about these kind of things. Cody, I was actually in love once myself. Didn't work out.
He kind of makes bad pics, huh?
He was the worst. Lied to me all the time, cheated on me.
Well, if I ever run into him, I'll give him your best.
Of course, you know, that was before I was a soldier. You're really crazy about Ellen, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I am.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with it, nothing to be embarrassed about.
I ain't embarrassed. I just know it ain't gonna work out. Ellen and I are going in different directions. Nobody's fault.
Maybe you're right, because you don't look like no backup singer to me.
They're buddies now, you know, like there's a genuine friendship. They just get each other, you know what I mean? And I love a natural relationship that's playing out on screen. Nothing feels forced. They don't ram it down your throat that it's a female doing a man's job either, you know, like that's what, you know, 2022 fucking Streets of Fire would do.
Yeah.
But this one is like, no, it lets things play out very naturally, and I loved it for that. I loved it for that.
So now we've talked a little bit about, Rick Moranis and Amy Madigan. Let's start thinking about some of the other cast here, Chris, because I'm interested to hear what you thought about all of them. And we'll mention some of the other kind of, recognizable names. I already mentioned E.G. Daily shows up in this, who, 80s movies fans will recognize as Dottie from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. She kind of joins the gang at a certain point, as does an entire doo-wop group that has some interesting and recognizable faces in it, including Michael T. Williamson, Bubba from Forrest Gump, and Robert Townsend. That's right, Meteor Man himself shows up as well. That's another thing I like about this. I know we'll get back to discussing the cast, but you were mentioning the trio of characters and how well they work together. But I love, and this is one of my Fury Road comparisons. I love how over the course of the movie they keep on picking up more people in their gang, and this gang keeps growing over the course of the movie. And I just think that's like such a fun little detail to it, that there are these other like kind of hanger-ons, and people are getting pulled into the wake of their decision to go rescue Ellen Aim and having to kind of go along with them in this like odyssey through the city. Well, go ahead.
No, it just makes it feel like the world is lived in. You know, like it builds up that odyssey. What you're saying, it builds up the fantasy that we're watching. That this world, and I hate this, but this world is living and breathing. You know what I mean? Like there's something here. We're not in New York. We're not in Chicago. We're in nameless fantasy land. Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same way, like when you're strolling down Middle Earth and you're going to meet people at, now at Hobbiton, let's just say, because I can't remember anything right now. I was going to say the Prancing Pony, right? Is that what it is? Right? Is that what it is?
I think so. Yeah. I think
it is. Right. Okay. Testing my Lord of the Rings knowledge off the top of my head. But yeah, it just feels like a full on fantastical world. Right. And, the little characters here and there. Did you like the? I guarantee she's bigger than this. But right away when I saw the black woman who drives the subway car, my mind, because I'm a child of the '90s, went.
I know exactly what you're going to say. Yeah.
Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
Yeah, Chief. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Acme. I'm the Chief, but you can call me, well, the Chief. We're in the business of tracking down thieves, and we're ultimately after one. Carmen Sandiego. Every creep we've ever collared has been working for her. Now, when you report for duty, I assign you a case. You go to the scene of the crime and look for clues about where the crook took the loot. Then the chase begins.
Well, she also plays a very pivotal role in The Warriors, even though you never see her face. In The Warriors, she is the, for people who are familiar with that movie, she's kind of the narrator of that film. She's the woman who is like giving radio updates throughout the course of the movie, and you honestly just see her lips and hear her voice. But still, she's like instantly recognizable. A couple other like really recognizable faces. There's a brief one scene appearance of Ed Begley Jr. Shows up as a strange homeless man who at one point gives them some assistance. And then I also just wanted to draw special attention, and you'll know why I want to when I mention where he's from. Raven Shattuck's like second in command, the second most important bomber, is Lee Ving, who punk rock fans will know as the lead singer and guitarist of the punk rock band Fear. But also, very importantly to me, he played Mr. Body in Clue, which you know is one of my all-time favorite movies, and certainly one of my favorite 80s movies. So it's kind of cool to see him in this as well. But let's get back to some of the main cast. Let's talk about Diane Lane, because we mentioned how this is a role she fought for. She really wanted, I think she saw it as a very adult role for her. And we know Walter Hill was impressed with her and kind of beefed up the role. So what did you think of her performance as Ellen Aim?
This performance might be one of the top 3 lip syncing performances I've ever seen.
You would never know it's not her, right?
No, well, that was the thing. When it first starts, right, it took me a second to realize it was Diane Lane, too, because, I mean, she is so young doing it, too, and she's, like, she's putting on a performance, right? Like, she is absolutely Ellen Aim on screen, and I had to, like, look afterwards being like, did Diane Lane sing these? Like she must have, right? But no, she lip syncs everything.
Yeah,
and it is.
I know she was kind of disappointed by that. She really wanted to sing it, but they did say they just had to be honest with her and be like, you just don't have the voice.
Right.
Yeah.
Diane, you have literally everything else. Okay?
Yeah, sorry you can't sing.
Sorry.
You'll just have to settle for being gorgeous and a great actress, and 18. So. And it's interesting enough, not only is it lip syncing, but I don't know if you saw this, Chris, the way because then you might ask, okay, well then whose voice is it? It was actually like 4 different female singers all singing that track, and then Jimmy Iovine electronically mixed them together to create this one singular voice.
No shit.
And you said like even he, like when I saw an interview with him, even he seemed kind of surprised it turned out as well as it did. But that's actually what you're hearing there. Yeah.
Wow. But no, she's remarkable. She gets the 2 standout performances to bookend the film, which it just gets you grooving in your sofa, and she's phenomenal. And I do love that in the middle of the movie, I don't want to give away much of this movie, but just in case people haven't seen it, but she gets a more of a substantial role. Let's say halfway through. Let's just say that. She's just, again, Diane Lane. There's nothing. She's great. She's fantastic.
She's really. She takes what could have been a simple damsel in distress role. Mm-hmm. And just through her like natural charisma and honestly the way she plays her scenes with Cody and everything, and like the sense of frustration she gets across for what happened with him in the past, and now how especially the way she kind of interacts with Billy Fish, and you can kind of tell what her real motivations are there. Mm-hmm. It's a complex character with layers to it, and that is obviously it's a credit to the screenplay, but we know that screenplay was being beefed up because of how well she was doing it on set. So, and
then we got the villain, Willem Dafoe. He is cartoony as hell. He's got that angular face. He is pure wretched evil, there's nothing redeeming. And I love that. I love a non-redeeming villain. We have to go back to that too. In 2022, the year of our Lord, every villain has to be redeemed. And it's like, Willem Dafoe's an asshole in this.
If Streets of Fire came out today and then turned out to be a hit, then we would hear that there's going to be a new Paramount Plus show called Raven Shattuck, right? That goes back and gives his tragic backstory, where we learn why he would go and kidnap a woman. It's like, no, we don't need that. I actually love in the movie that even his motivations are so dumb and simplistic, to where he even comes in when he has Ellen Aim kidnapped, and he basically just tells her all you got to do is kind of be in love with me for a couple days, and then I'll let you go. That's all I'm looking for, right? I'm just looking for a temporary girlfriend.
I've always loved a clear villain and a clear hero, right? Mm-hmm. Just the Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, right? Until again, Disney fucking fucked that up too. Or, but not even Disney. I guess Lucas did as well. But it's just there's a simplicity to a story that makes it timeless, right? Yeah. There's a reason why these archetypes exist, and. Especially after the nightmare that was Buckaroo Banzai. Oh my God, I just...
Okay, all right.
I like when I have... It's like, okay, me and my buddy, one of his favorite movies of all time is Face Off, right? Mm-hmm. And Castor Troy is fucking evil.
Yes.
Okay? He never is redeemed. He gets worse as the movie goes on, right? And we've always talked about one of the best... cinematic interpretations of a bad guy and a good guy is that movie, and Sean Archer versus Castor Troy is undeniably good versus evil, right? That's what shows you there were 90s kids as well, by the way.
I was gonna say, in keeping with that, if you want to just go to another Nicolas Cage 90s movie, I would also say Con Air with Cyrus the Virus, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I just loved Willem Dafoe in this. I will say my one little critique about the movie,
okay,
which keeps it from being perfect,
okay,
is that I do wish he was in it more. And I understand that he's, this is not what they're going for, but I'm going to make the analogy is he's like the shark from Jaws, you don't see him until you need to see him. But there's a moment in the movie where he faces off with Tom Cody and he walks out and there's flames around him, right? And it's fucking badass. And he comes out there and the whole time I'm thinking, I was like, holy shit, is he really in these flames? It seemed dangerous. and he speaks with Tom Cody. And right after that scene, I was like, man, I want to see this guy more, and I want to see them face off maybe just one more time before their ultimate face off. Again, there's not enough Willem Dafoe in any Willem Dafoe movie, so maybe that's where I'm coming from.
Looks like I finally ran into someone that likes to play as rough as I do.
Yeah, this must be your lucky night.
I'm lucky. I guess maybe I am. And you're dumb. Real dumb if you think you can pull this off.
I think you're forgetting something. I got the gun.
I can get guns, smart guy, lots of them. Now, why don't you tell me your name?
Tom Cody. Pleased to meet you.
I'll be coming for her. And I'll be coming for you, too.
Sure you will. And I'll be waiting.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. And that scene you're talking about, though, is like a perfect... Is, you know, when you were mentioning before, just how perfect the battle of good and evil with these two characters is. That's the moment where you realize these, you know, Tom Cody and Raven Shattuck as the hero and villain, they're like elemental, right?
Yes.
The moment they see themselves, they recognize immediately that they're opposite numbers. And they know exactly how this has to end, right? Because part of like I said, we don't want to get into, you know, specific spoilers here, but there are some opportunities that the hero has to kind of leave this conflict behind, right? And he knows that that's not the way it can go, or it has to. Once these two guys decide to get in each other's path, once he's in the path of Raven Shattuck, there's only one way this can all end, and we have to get to that point. And yeah, that's like perfectly encapsulated on screen with them in that moment. And so for that reason, I agree that it would have been nice to see them together a little bit more. But I will say I also don't know how it would fit into the story and the narrative that's just chugging along at the speed it is in this, right? Because it is more of this like this Odyssey based, and this is also. This is the thing I know Walter Hill loves, and this is where, again, my Fury Road comparison comes, is this idea of, like, the Odyssey on screen, right? Where the entire movie is just watching these characters on a mission to get from one place to another while being pursued. And that's, like, a big part of this film. That is the plot of The Warriors as well, which is about the Warriors having to get across New York while running the gauntlet through the territory of every other gang. So it's kind of tough to figure out where else you would put Raven in, because do you want him to just kind of keep popping up and getting defeated? Not really, because you need him to remain scary and a potential threat for the end, right? So it's tough, but I won't disagree that it would have been nice to just see more Willem Dafoe, which is always true.
Now, Michael Paré. Okay?
Yeah.
Let's just say right off the bat that the filmmakers somewhat blame him for... Well, I mean, I don't want to say blame.
At least Larry Gross does. Like,
yes.
Larry Gross has been pretty down on him. I've seen Walter Hill be much more like Walter Hill has defended Michael Parré's performance.
Cool.
Even in acknowledging, he's like, I know some people like to blame Michael or say it wasn't good, and I've seen Walter Hill say like, I think he was pretty good in it. But Larry Gross does not share that sentiment.
Yeah, see, and I would vehemently disagree with Larry Gross because Michael Paré strikes this perfect balance of just like. He's just too cool for school, you know? And
dude, I mean, this is going to sound really mean, and I did this kind of in a more flippant, jokey way, because I was maybe like alluding a little bit to, you know, the criticism of his part, and like how stilted the performance is, but again, in a moment I'll talk about why I don't think that's really an issue.
Yeah.
But in the review I initially wrote of this movie on Letterboxd a few years ago, when I finally got around to reviewing it, my line was, if reading lines wasn't required, Michael Paré would have been one of the biggest stars in the world. And I say that because I'll actually defend his performance in a moment, as it sounds you will too. But just visuals alone, and this is a very visual driven movie, this dude is gorgeous on screen. He looks exactly like what Walter Hill was saying, right? That mixture of like toughness and innocence, because he's got this kind of boyish face, and yet he also looks dangerous and looks scary. He looks like somebody you wouldn't want to get in a fight with.
Well, and then when he walks in and slaps the shit out of the greasers, you know, he's wearing suspenders and a sleeveless denim top.
Yeah, not the toughest look. You know, you have to be tough to pull that off.
Totally. And the moment he did that, I was like, this is awesome. I love this. So
that's what I mean. Like when people criticize the performance, I kind of get where they're coming from because it is stilted, right? He has this kind of unnatural cadence.
Sure.
But over time, I've certainly come to appreciate that more because, and I think this is probably where you'll fall as well, it actually ends up being this like kind of perfect match for that cowboy cliche dialogue, as Walter Hill put it, right? It makes him seem more archetypal, that he just has this like bizarre, he seems out of the world too, out of place, and that works well for a movie like this.
Yeah, it's by design, at least in my opinion. obviously Larry Gross doesn't agree, and a lot of other people don't either. But I found him totally. I don't want to use the word adequate. That's not what I'm trying to say. But he does what everybody in this movie does what they set out to do. And I've always been it goes back to the way that I've heard Roger Ebert talk about films before, and he was, he uses the 4-star system, as I do as well, and I know some of our listeners don't like that either, but it doesn't matter. I use it anyways. I will make the world what I want. But the 4-star system doesn't necessarily mean when you give a movie 4 out of 4, it's a fucking, Saving Private Ryan, Schindler's List masterpiece of all masterpieces, right? All we're really saying is that if a movie sets out what it's trying to do and does it well and does it how much better can it get? How much better can this movie do it?
This is our Galaxy Quest discussion. Remember?
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Totally. You and I both gave a perfect score to Galaxy Quest online because we said what would improve that movie for what it's trying to do? Not a damn thing I can think of.
Nothing. Yeah. And that's this movie's almost there. Yeah. This movie's almost there. I wouldn't give it a 4, but I would give it my my 3.5, which is very coveted. But it's what more can you do with that performance? What I you know what I'm trying to say? I just
well, that's why earlier you mentioned, and I know what you mean. I know what you're getting at because we love him, and you said, oh, that would be fantastic if this was Tom Cruise.
Right.
But honestly, I kind of maybe the Tom Cruise of today, yes.
Yeah.
But the Tom Cruise of 1983, I actually think would have been kind of a terrible Tom Cody, because you think of that early Tom Cruise, the Tom Cruise of Risky Business and Losing It, and he's just got this level of smarm to him a little bit, right? That devilish gleam in his eye that I actually don't think would work well for this. That's why I think if I had to choose of the other actors who were up for this, I think Patrick Swayze would have been the best one, because Patrick Swayze is more stoic than Tom Cruise is, right? And I think that's what Tom Cody needs to be. I think Tom Cody needs to be stoic, and that is exactly what Michael Pare is, both just seemingly in real life, but also certainly in this movie.
Stoic, but also a little sarcastic. Mm-hmm. He's. Like we said, the trio likes to dig at each other, and he's not one to shy away from that either. So he's not devoid of humor.
He's not devoid, but he's not trying. He's not leaning into it. That's the thing. I feel like young Tom Cruise would have been kind of Ryan Reynolds-ish in his delivery, maybe, and that's not what you're asking for, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
When Tom Cody rips on someone, you feel like he's not doing it because he thinks it's funny. He's saying what he honestly believes, and the humor comes from that's just what he thinks of Billy Fish. You know,
totally. And while we're still on the the subject of Michael Pare, we got to mention his greenness to the Hollywood system, right? Mm-hmm. And working with Walter Hill, as we've said a couple times now, Walter Hill is a manly man. Pare is quoted saying that he's a tough son of a bitch. He's like a cowboy. His director's chair was made out of leather, and on the back of it read "Lone Wolf."
Oh man, I love Walter Hill.
That's absolutely hilarious. So I don't think Pare was ready for Walter as a director. No. He's also quoted saying that he was probably used to working with actors who had experience, like Nick Nolte or David Carradine. So yes, very different from this chef.
Yeah.
So they I don't want to say they butted heads, but I think he was more. Maybe he needed more guidance.
I think he needed a director who could hold his hand a little bit and and walk him through. Not only he's new to being in movies, but just also the weight of being the leading man in a big production like this, right?
Absolutely.
Because even something like Eddie and the Cruisers is a much smaller character based thing. So Eddie and the Cruisers is this movie where he plays a famous rock star that's gone missing. And then over the course of the movie, you're basically seeing these flashbacks of trying to fill in the backstory of who was this enigmatic rock star and why did he disappear. Mm-hmm. So that's smaller. It's contained. And then suddenly you're here, be Tom Cody in this this mythic epic. And I think he probably felt like, okay, I need some help with that. And Walter Hill is like, too damn bad, kid. It's I cast you because you're pretty. Let's go.
Yeah, he's again, he's quoted here saying about the Hollywood system, you got to realize that out of the whole cast, nobody was over 30. Diane Lane was, I think, 18. It was an enormous Hollywood production. My manager had me hire a limousine to pick me up at home and take me to work. I was like, Jesus, this is incredible. This is Hollywood, the real Hollywood, the Hollywood they make movies about. It was scary, and Walter isn't the kind of guy who works well with kids. He's a cowboy. He's like John Ford. Don't ask me how to act. I'm a director. And then in parentheses, he laughed. So yes.
Yeah, it's funny because I get the sense that that is what Michael Pray kind of like respects and like looks for in a director, is someone who's kind of like will boss them around a little bit and be. And you know why I think that, and this speaks to what Michael Pray's career is like today, right? So if anyone's listening to this and isn't too familiar with him and they're wondering, well, what happened to this guy? Like, he is very consistently working. He got a lot of work after this, but he never really takes off. You know, he does do the Eddie and the Cruiser sequel, as I said. He pops up in a couple other high profile movies, but today he's one of those guys who shows up in a lot of like the shitty movies I love watching.
Right.
He's kind of a regular in like Full Moon Productions, and in particular, he is a frequent collaborator of Uwe Boll. He's in a bunch of Uwe Boll movies, but if you know Uwe Boll's personality and how he's always just so like bombastic and full of himself, and you bet on the movie sets he's like yelling at the actors and everything, and I bet today Michael Pray probably kind of like likes that, and that's why he keeps working with him. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Now that we've talked about the cast and some stories in between, the production, the pre-production, what we feel about it. What we haven't mentioned yet, I mean, we did mention the music. Of course, we've mentioned the songs. Mm-hmm. But I think, it's been a while since we've had one of these. So let's do a little bit of score whore here. Sure. And the score is by Ry Cooder. Hilarious name, first of all. I've never heard of this person before. But what I loved about the score here is that it gives off big honky-tonk rock energy. Okay.
Yeah.
And it feels like a band is just jamming in the garage. That's all that and that's what and it's just played underneath basically everything. And it's a great blend because it keeps you in the 50s world while the music, like the actual songs, feel very 80s inspired. So it kind of grounds it and it keeps you guessing about where this era is. But I love the words I kept saying to myself is like, this is honky tonk energy. And I was really into it.
I had a feeling you might not be that familiar with Ry Cooder because you said you weren't too familiar with Walter Hill in general.
Right.
He works with Walter Hill a lot. He had also done the scores for The Long Riders and Southern Comfort by this point, and he goes on to work with them again on like Johnny Handsome and Last Man Standing. But yeah, if you look up Ry Cooder, he's one of those kind of jack of all trades musicians who, first of all, his like overall output will make you feel like such a failure, where it's one of those things like, oh my god, look how much stuff this guy has done, right? And he very much is one of those like he's not locked into a particular genre, right? He can kind of do everything, and you get the sense that when he comes to like a film, like to do like a score for it, he just knows what the right vibe is and what the right tone.
Right.
And you're exactly right that kind of like that bluegrass, like blues, honky-tonk feel that he adds to this is kind of this like perfect, I don't want to call it counterpoint, but it's like the perfect partner to the rock songs in it, right? Because it further helps it place it out of time, because you have the Alan Ames and the Attacker songs, which have that 80s Jim Steinman big epic feel to them. Then you have like the Sorrells, the doo-wop group they pick up. When you hear their song, it very much has this kind of like Motown sound to it.
Yep.
Then you have the Blasters, the actual band, doing their two songs at Torchy's, the hideout of the Bombers, and those are like these two like kind of really fun rockabilly songs, right? So it's like it's all over the place. And I think just making it more timeless with Ry Cooder's score is a great touch. So yeah, I think the score gets a little lost and not talked about as much as the soundtrack does to this movie, because obviously the soundtrack gets a lot of attention. Yeah. But you're definitely right that Ry Cooder's score deserves more credit as well.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. It's awesome. And again, about the soundtrack, I've been listening to the soundtrack the last few days. Like it's just been on.
There's like I said, I mean, first of all, I'm so glad you like the movie, because I've never shown this movie to someone who didn't like it. So like I said, I would have hated for that streak to break. But let's just say somewhere in the world there's some crazy person with brain damage who does not like this movie, right? Even if you didn't like the movie, if whatever reason the story or something, the performances didn't speak to you, you have to be dead inside to not like those two songs, the two Steinman songs. If Nowhere Fast and Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young don't speak to you and don't get you going, I don't know. There's no saving you.
Yeah, they are straight bops. Like it is very just all around. This movie's a blast. A blast. And that's why I'm so shocked that it quote unquote failed, right? Because they planned on making a trilogy. This was always established to be, since the inception, Walter Hill was like, I'm making a franchise. This is a character. I want to watch Tom Cody go through adventures, right?
Yeah, the trilogy was called The Adventures of Tom Cody. He had already tentatively titled the 2 sequels. It was going to be The Far City and then Cody's Return. And this, I believe the script even said at the end, like, this is to be continued.
Yeah. And I just got to ask you, like, it failed so hard, so much so that Joel Silver, famous Hollywood producer Joel Silver, who's also a producer on this film, got off the phone with Universal after the opening weekend and just goes, "We're dead." And he compared it to the song title, "Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young." And he says to Hill and Gross, he goes, "Today is what it means to be dead." So, they
Well, I mean, you said you're kind of baffled by it, but this movie is one of our go-to, one of our favorite stories here, in that there was an executive shakeup while this was being made. Mm-hmm. The executive who initially, approved it at Universal, by the time this movie came out, he had left. He had gone to 20th Century Fox. And Larry Gross has talked about how he said, it's that kind of thing where the new executive did not want a film that was like greenlit by his predecessor to be a hit. Right? It's that dumb thing where it's like, even though it's your studio, you want to sabotage the projects of the previous person. I've never understood that, but we've seen this story, 1,000 times by now. And Gross has talked about how that's disappointing because they had a pretty interesting ad campaign, designed where they had, like I said, they had those really cool looking, I'm sure you've seen it by now, those cool, like, kind of wood carving posters, those like wood block, cartoony ones with the very bright colors. And Larry Gross said, like, I feel like once this guy took over and decided, he didn't get the film, he didn't understand it. And this is a strange film, so that makes sense to a degree.
Sure.
But he basically said, like, they didn't even promote it, they didn't try. And obviously they also had some pretty big competition when it came out, correct?
Yeah, it went up against Star Trek 3.
Yeah.
The Search for Spock. So
yeah.
After 10 days, this movie made the exact same amount of money that Star Trek made in one day.
Yeah. I guess the only thing that could console them at the time was that this movie was huge in Japan. I don't know if you read that or not, but that was the kind of the one market where it really took off. And I've actually seen Michael Prey
Ichiban.
Well,
Lipstick for men.
I've seen Michael Prey talk about why he thinks that is, and it's actually a good point where he says, he said it's because they love stories of samurai there. And he basically said, like, this is very much like almost like the Tom Cody, like that kind of mythic story has an element of those samurai films to it.
Totally. And
he said maybe that feeds into why it was such a big hit there. But Walter Hill has said he's like even before this kind of resurgence of the movie, he went to Japan on some kind of press tour, and he was surprised to find that more than half the people that came up to him and talked to him there, he's like, in America, everyone wants to talk about Alien or 48 Hours. And there everyone's like, Streets of Fire. We want to talk about Streets of Fire. And that really shocked him because he didn't know this movie had taken off anywhere. Now, so Chris, it is true that unfortunately we didn't get the two, immediate Adventures of Tom Cody sequels. And I think it's safe to say both you and I wish that it happened. I would definitely be down for seeing more of it. Now, that said, I don't know how aware you are of this, but I was fine with doing this movie in this podcast because it didn't get the sequels they were intending. However, in 2008, we did get an unofficial sequel to this movie. Michael Pare was called back into action as Tom Cody, and Deborah Van Valkenburg was called back into action as Riva, his sister, for a film called Road to Hell, which was not, Larry Gross and Walter Hill had nothing to do with it. It's actually directed by noted schlockmeister Albert Pune. Albert Pune is kind of known for making these very kind of low budget, sometimes fun, but often just kind of like, oh boy, sci-fi B monster movies. But he was obviously one of the filmmakers who loved this movie and was disappointed it never got a sequel. So he said, you know what, I'll just go ahead and do it. I'll make the sequel. And that film is called Road to Hell. This is a movie that as much as I love Streets of Fire, to this day I've not watched this because I'm afraid to. And a large part of the reason I'm afraid to is because I have seen the trailer for this movie. Chris, I want to just take a little moment here, and I have sent you the trailer, and you can just take a moment, and I want you to watch the trailer right now. I'm going to wait. And then we'll cut this down in the podcast. But I want the listeners to hear your immediate reaction to the trailer to Road to Hell, the unofficial sequel to Streets of Fire.
Best Picture. Best Actor. Best Actress. Best Supporting Actress. Were they the only film? Well, I've just returned back from watching the trailer.
I assume you're a changed man now.
I'm shocked they couldn't get Diane Lane back.
But they do have that very convincing Diane Lane body double. So
Yes, and conveniently they had one tarp up to make every scene filmed with green screen. So it was all filmed in a basement somewhere, and I hope everybody got paid. And I assume for a couple $100.
Yeah. Isn't that like just? I mean, just in that trailer, don't you just get this like? It's such a bummer, right? Like
that was depressing.
That's pretty. It's just depressing to know that like Perret did that kind of right to come back to that character after all this time for that. It's like to think instead of Walter Hill actually, returning and making his sequels. Instead, we get this Albert Pune nightmare.
Yeah, like Shameless. And it's like I was giving a lot of positives for Michael Paré, as a younger man, but as an older man, he might be a moron. So, okay, and we don't like making fun of actors. We don't like making fun
of actors. That's for sure.
Yeah, I hate that you made me watch that.
I'm sorry, but I've seen it, so you had to as well.
But I do love you for making me watch this.
Yeah. I mean, let's face it. This movie passes the dread test hard.
Yeah. Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes, this movie's awesome. This is definitely near the top of what we've done on this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, when I pitched this entire 80s run, this was one of the main reasons I pitched it. Like, obviously I was excited about the idea of just doing the 80s in general, but it was one of the first ones I thought of, and I was like, when we do the 80s thing, I got to make sure we get Streets of Fire in there, because I said it's got a cult following, but to me, it's like never a big enough following. This is just a movie I want everyone to know about, and I want everyone to see. And I've loved introducing people to this movie over the years, and hopefully that will continue. That's my mission in life, because this is something to see for sure. And it's just so unique. It's unique in a way we unfortunately don't get from the studios today. And I mean, maybe that's because when they come out, they don't do very well. but oh well, this movie rules.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing really else we can say about it. I loved it, so I look forward to finding a Blu-ray of it at some point.
Yeah, good luck in your journey.
I might have to just bite the bullet, honestly, but not right now because I'm not going to rewatch it anytime soon. But I
don't know. I haven't seen. Was there a 4K release of this? Like it feels like a movie that. Okay, this feels like a movie that's going to happen. I would have to imagine.
Yeah, the only ones I can find are the Shout Factory one. Right?
Yeah, that's what I have. But this movie feels like built for a 4K restoration.
Right. No, yeah, it would look amazing. But nothing. The only other ones I can find is the UK version of the DVD, or of the Blu-ray, which has that awesome illustrated cover. But it doesn't play in Region A. Right? We're Region A.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it doesn't play.
So I don't know what Canada is. You guys might be Region Z for all I know, but
it's Z. Oh wait, Z.
Okay,
which one is it? What do we say?
I don't know. You're asking me.
Can't remember what we say. No, we say Z. Canadians say Z. Is that why you said it?
Yeah.
Oh, over my head.
I assumed you did. Yeah.
We've been recording for a while, and I got hopped up on this in the chaotic nature that is.
Maybe Michael Perret was right about Moranis and the rest of you Canadians.
Shut up. One last thing I wanted to say. I didn't realize that Streets of Fire was so damn literal. Because there is so many explosions, so much fire in it, and I did like the big action set piece. I'm not going to tell again. We're not going to spoil anything, honestly.
Yeah.
But I like the big action set piece halfway through.
Without spoiling it, even though I make fun of you for your love of explosions, I'm not above admitting that one of my favorite things in movies are these worlds where everything explodes.
Yeah. And from he's shooting a rifle from so far away. And motorbikes are just exploding upon touch.
Yeah,
it's great. But yeah, that'll about do it for this episode of Failure to Franchise. Again, we're in the middle of Fall Back to the 80s right now.
Yeah.
So we have coming up next episode is Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins from 1985.
Quite the optimistic title. Can't wait to see if that panned out for him.
Yeah. I just went to Vegas, and the odds are against you.
Okay.
So, Masters of the Universe, 1987, is up after that one. And then wrapping up Fall Back to the 80s will be Shocker from 1989. So, I don't know where my hopes lie right now. I have a feeling that this Fall Back to the 80s looks like a mountain. We've gained steam up, and now, there might be a decline. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I mean, to be fair, Masters of the Universe is going to have Dolph Lundgren like in a loincloth all oiled up, so...
Your favorite thing?
I was trying to give you it, Ian. But okay.
I got you, though.
Hey, well, I have no problem. We just did talk about how much we both love Dolph, so that's fine.
Yeah, that's true. So follow along with us at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod on Twitter, Instagram, all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. A star rating would be awesome. And just join the tribe and hit that subscribe and keep along with us on the fall back to the 80s. We got some great stuff in store coming up and beyond. Actually, weirdly enough, we actually have we've planned out the movies until I think like August of 2023.
Yeah, whatever else you might say about our podcast, don't ever accuse us of not putting in like the planning and doing the work, because I feel like how many other podcasts, I'm sure there's plenty of podcasts that probably have more listeners, but how many of them have their entire slate planned that far into next year?
100%.
Yeah.
Let's see who survives.
Yeah, so hopefully we won't get canceled.
So yes, follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2 pod on, I said that wrong. So yeah, follow along with us at F2. Oh my God. How did I fuck this up 2 episodes in a row? So yeah, please, I don't want to say please. I don't like begging.
Okay. I love that you're so masculine after watching this movie that you're like, please, begging.
Yeah.
Tom Cody would never say please.
Fuck no. He just take names and bang Diane Lane.
But if you ever need me for something,